Well, I get now to interview a hero of my own. Wole Soyinka is known as the conscience of Africa. A Nobel Prize-winning writer, he's Nigeria's voice of truth. A voice both blunt and elegant. The and religion and a Nigerians to the flaws of a democracy that's buffeted by ethnic nations. Come. Hey. I love you. What a how did it course of Boko Haram up there on that video, and they sleeping college
of failing school pupils, so just to attend school, tying their hands behind their back. They've gone down. In their beds and tortured in all kinds of ways.
We need a hand mic for Mr. Soyinka. Can you hear everybody? Yes? Yes, okay, go on.
Yeah, and it's this particular kind of atrocity against humanity, just the only response which I have is that I think it's about time we redefined humanity, because I think there are some acts which are outside the pale, which for me disqualifies being considered human. Consider bypass that stage. I think this of considering this is part of
see this has now exploded in Nigeria?
Well, there are two aspects there. First of all, people see videos, they look at the videos, those who call themselves followers of the faith they can earn a greater for acts of horrors already. The issue comes in, political issue. Unwashed masses, if you like, unemployed. This form of anti-human activities, and then they run out of control. Mm-hmm. So even those who unleash them on society in the first place can no longer control them. They themselves are now created.
More.
Just thought those child security began by thinking not in a totally dehumanize them. Bad social conscience, all you have to do is create jobs, all you have to do is create special schools and rescue the so-called Almajiri from control. They underestimated the power of fanaticism, which is totally beyond rationality. It's totally beyond even, that factor that is injected into the brain. Slow in realizing that this has formed associations outside, that some of the and that this was becoming part of the worldwide event.
Well, looking, of course, at your amazing career, you've spent your life in your midst, so how do you, who've been such a public, intellectual fighter against suppression, how do you think we can now respond then to the threats in your midst in Nigeria?
Well, some of the steps being creation of, which I referred to earlier, of sort of nomadic schools to rescue, the foot soldiers. But the government has lacked honesty in dealing with the original, the real leaders of the movement. They were not unknown. The security knew them. They knew that there were political malcontents, power-drunk individuals. Then there are the chauvinists, the ethnic chauvinists who mangled religion together with political directions, manipulations, and so on and so forth. And so some steps were actually taken in the right direction to try and rescue the foot soldiers. But as I emphasized, the failure to punish, and also the posture of appeasement with which the government began. The culprits, the real manipulators, the real leaders, were not seized and dealt with at the appropriate time. And they continued with their acts of impunity. They threatened, in fact, not just the state, but then the humanity within the nation itself. They were already creating cells, not just in the north, but in the south. Some cells were broken up in the southern part. And ultimately, when Mali was taken, Mali to the north, by the external forces of extremism, mixture of Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and so on, then the government really woke up to the fact that the nation itself was menaced, not merely internally, but by very powerful forces, including, let me not omit this, after the overthrow of Gaddafi, who was sustained, as you know, by mercenaries from outside, Al-Qaeda, extreme militants, Al-Shabaab, people used to go and train in Libya, and so you had the flushing out of these mercenaries from Libya. Where would they go? They always want a base.
And that's why they've come into Nigeria.
That's what, thank you. So they took over Mali and then began moving into Nigeria. And that's where Nigeria and the ECOWAS countries really woke up. But France took the first step, and then the others followed.
So why do you think that Africa didn't develop in the way that so many of your generation thought it would back in 1960, the great year of African independence? I mean, this is all, when you're looking back, I mean, this is like a a strange arc where we are today.
How do we, sorry, I missed the beginning of the
Well,
question.
why do you think that Africa didn't develop in the way that you expected in the 1960s, in that great year of independence?
It's a very complex situation. People like to give just one cause. We can blame things on colonialism itself, and that would be quite accurate. You can blame the situation on surrogate colonialism, through multinational corporations, even the discovery of valuable minerals like oil and the renewed interest of external companies for the continuation of colonial exploitation. You can blame it also on the Cold War, in which the two camps, the West and the East, used African countries as surrogates for their ideological fight, which was, of course, not just a Cold War, but a very hot war right on the soil of the African continent. And ultimately, you come to the leadership which, in fact, instituted through military dictatorships, one-party systems, instituted what are termed internal colonialism, against which the people then rose. And so had all these little very hot wars all over the place. And then ultimately, when you thought you got rid of all of that, or at least brought it under control, now have this jihadist movement, which doesn't care as long as it captures territory, captures mines, captures new weaponry, and starkly states that our mission, and they don't fudge it, say our mission is to Islamize the entire continent. And they're not talking about Orthodox Islam, no, they're talking about a very narrow, very perverted, perverse, brutal, interpretation of Islam. So that even the Orthodox Islam, what you might call the mainstream Islam, and the followers of mainstream Islam on the continent have become the first-line targets. That is what is happening in northern Nigeria today.
Well, certainly because most of those students were Muslims.
The students were Muslims.
Yeah,
the students were Muslims. So the emirs, the political leadership of Islam in the country, they've been targeted. Some have barely escaped assassination. So even those who at the beginning felt that it was just a mild jihadist war in which they rejoiced at the beginning, are now looking to the state for protection against these
them.
Extremists.
I found your last book on Africa absolutely fascinating. I recommend it to everybody here. It's so counterintuitive in every way. And I was actually riveted by the chapter in which you talked about the corrosive failure of Africa to admit its own historical role in the slave trade, which was sort of very explosive, I know, when you wrote it. Tell me a little bit about those ideas and why you think that it's become corrosive even to this day, that failure, as you put it, to kind of expiate Africa's own role in the slave trade.
Well, if one doesn't confront history honestly, this is a truism, a cliche, but a truism just the same. One doesn't confront the past honestly, one is bound to commit the same errors or to imitate the errors of other people. This is what the United States, for instance, I think it's the lesson which has been learned by the United States, leading to a moral dilemma in many areas of the world. The United States has learned from Iraq, come face to face with its failures, its initial error in Iraq. And as a result, it's become much more cautious in its foreign policies, foreign interventions elsewhere. Now, we can quarrel, we can argue about whether or not the United States should take this step or not, or avoid this step. The important thing is that its decision is actually being influenced by the fact that it's confronted its former errors. And so when I talk about Africans confronting their own past, especially in relation to slavery, I'm referring to exactly the same process of human development. That it's not sufficient to tell the truth about or to assert the crimes of others against yourselves, you must also be honest enough to admit your own complicity in the crimes against your own kind. Many of our brothers and sisters in the United States don't like to hear this, but the fact is that they are here, they're in the Caribbean, they're in Latin America, the United States, because of the betrayal by their own leaders. The slave trade could never have succeeded on the African continent without the collaboration. And the descendants of those collaborators are still very much with us. By descendants, I mean mentally, those who see others as superior beings, as inferior beings.
You're talking about the dealers on the slave traders on the coast who would go into the continent and capture people and bring them to the West, sell them to the West.
Sorry, say that again.
I mean, explain perhaps a little more to people here what you mean about the complicity. I mean, that they actually, the Africans themselves would go in and capture other, their own brothers and bring them to death.
That's what I mean by complicity, that they were guilty of collaborating, and the evidence is there. I've done a lot of research. In fact, part of my current research has to do with the other slavery directions, which are avoided by historians generally, and this include, in fact, the internal enslavement of Africans by Africans. The guilt of the West is beyond anything. It's been recorded in films, in tomes, in paintings. It's there, but we also, must understand that some of the problems which we have today has to do with that mentality of dominance, whether it's external dominance or internal dominance.
Obviously, you spent time in prison, 2 years, as we saw in the video, and that was during the Civil War in Nigeria that you were in prison, and yet you still managed to write. And how was your writing changed by those 2 years, Wole? I mean, thinking you did in those 2 years of solitary confinement.
I don't know that it's changed that much. I think I had a small period of bitterness, which obviously will reflected in my writing. Not so much because I was in prison, but because of some hideous lies that was told against me when I was in a position where I couldn't respond. So I think the first year or two I took time to respond in a very bitter way about that. But then I went back to my normal writing, and if anything, my experience in prison just made me worse of what I was before. It didn't change anything for the better.
Wanting to tell truth to power. Now, you lost a good friend in the poet who died in the terrible massacre in the Westgate Mall in Kenya. Can you tell me about him, your friend, the poet?
Yes, Kofi Awuna, poet, statesman, activist. He also went to prison for some time in Ghana for political reasons. It was a wonderful individual, and it's very strange that I won't be seeing him again. And through such circumstances, we know death is always there, but that brutal accident, he just happened to be in the wrong spot, at a critical time, and then he was gone. Thank goodness his son survived, but then I think of him and I think of all those others who just brutally. And the most horrifying aspect of that incident for me, and this is something we've been going through in Nigeria for many, many years, that the passport to survival is the religion. That people come in a crowd like this and isolate those who belong to one religion, and say you can go, and the others are gunned down or have their throats cut. I mean, that's not what humanity is supposed to be about. And such people who create that kind of fatal otherness, for me, have become the real critical problem of the world today.
Wole, I know you wanted to read a poem by your friend the poet. Would you like to do that now?
Yes, I thought I have my glasses here. Anyway, this is one of this man who mic'd me up. What did he do with my glasses? sometimes I can read without. I mean, this is Kofi Awuno's The Weaver Bird. The weaver bird built in our house and laid its eggs on our only tree. We did not want to send it away. We watched the building of the nest and supervised the egg laying. And the weaver returned in the guise of the owner, preaching salvation to us that owned the house. They say it came from the west, where the storms at sea had felled the gulls, and the fishers dried their nets by lantern light. Its sermon is the divination of ourselves and our new horizons limit as its nest. But we cannot join the prayers and answers of the communicants. We look for new homes every day. For new altars, we strive to rebuild the old shrines defiled from the weaver's excrement.
Thank you. Thank you, Wole Soyinka, very much for joining us. We're going to have you back at the end of the day to talk about what makes a hero, and you certainly know about that. Thank you.